A normal Thursday morning at the gym turned into unexpected drama over a single machine. What started as tension and pride slowly became a lesson in patience and self-control. Sometimes the smallest conflicts teach the biggest life lessons. Before going to forward in the story, please subscribe my channel and like and share this video. I've been going to the same gym for 4 years. Same location, same early mornings, same routine. I get there around 6:30 a.m., before work, before the rush, before the after-work crowd turns the place into a maze of sweaty chaos. The early crowd is predictable. A few regulars, mostly quiet, mostly focused. We nod at each other sometimes. No small talk, just mutual respect. That's why what happened last Thursday caught me completely off guard. That morning started like any other. I walked in, scanned my membership card, gave the front desk guy a quick "morning," and headed straight to the cable machine. It's one of the most versatile pieces of equipment in the gym. You can do almost a full upper body workout there if you plan it right. And I had planned it right. I was doing a full cable workout that day. Rows, tricep pushdowns, face pulls, curls, the works. I set my water bottle on the little built-in shelf, propped my phone up against it with my workout plan open, and got started. The gym was quiet. A few treadmills humming, light clanking from the free weights area. Nothing unusual. About 10 minutes into my session, I noticed a woman walk in. I didn't pay much attention at first. New faces show up all the time. But after my third set, I saw her again, standing near the cable area, looking around. Still, I didn't think anything of it. It's a gym. People wait for machines sometimes. By the 15-minute mark, I was fully in the zone. Headphones in, focused, resting between sets, checking my plan, adjusting the weight stack. That's when she came over. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, close enough that I could see her in my peripheral vision. Not close enough to be accidentally nearby. Close enough to send a message. I was mid-set, so I finished it properly. Controlled reps, good form, racked the weight. I pulled one earbud out. "Hey," I said politely, "did you need something?" She crossed her arms. "I've been waiting for this machine," she said. Her tone wasn't neutral, it wasn't friendly. It had that sharp edge, like she had already decided I was in the wrong. "Oh," I said. "Okay, I've got a few more sets left. You're welcome to work in between mine if you'd like." That's standard gym etiquette. If someone's using a machine for multiple sets, you rotate during rest periods. Most people do it without drama. She shook her head immediately. "I don't want to work in." I blinked. "Okay." "I want to use the machine," she continued. "You've been on it a long time." I glanced at my phone. Just under 20 minutes. "It's part of my workout," I said calmly. "There's no time limit here. I won't be too much longer." She let out a short laugh. 20 minutes is a long time to monopolize equipment. Monopolize. That word caught me off guard. I looked around. It was 6:59 a.m. The gym was still half empty. "I offered to let you work in," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That's pretty standard." "I shouldn't have to," she snapped. And that's when I realized this wasn't about sharing, it was about control. I've been lifting long enough to recognize the difference between someone politely waiting and someone trying to assert dominance over a situation. She wasn't asking, she was demanding. "I'm going to finish my planned sets," I said evenly. "You're welcome to use it after." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "So you're just going to ignore me?" I resisted the urge to laugh. "No," I said, "I'm just going to finish my workout." There was a long pause. She stared at me like she expected me to fold. I didn't. Finally, she said, "Unbelievable," under her breath, and walked off. I put my earbud back in and continued my next set, but I could feel it, that tension. You know when you just know something isn't over, when someone walks away too stiffly? Yeah. About 2 minutes later, I saw her again. This time, she wasn't alone. She was walking towards me with one of the staff members, and that's when I realized this random Thursday morning was about to become way more eventful than I ever expected. I saw them coming before they reached me. The staff member was Jason, one of the regular morning guys. Early 30s, calm, always polite. I'd seen him there for years. He knew most of us 6:30 a.m. regulars by face, if not by name. He didn't look angry. He didn't look alarmed. If anything, he looked mildly confused. The woman, on the other hand, looked determined, arms crossed again, chin slightly raised, like she was walking into a courtroom with a case ready to present. I finished my set before acknowledging them. I wasn't going to stop mid-rep just because someone was trying to escalate things. I re-racked the weight, pulled out my earbuds, and turned to face them. "Hey, Jason," I said casually. "Morning," he replied. Then he glanced at the woman. "So, what seems to be the issue?" She jumped in before he even finished the sentence. "He's been hogging this machine for over 20 minutes. I've been waiting and he refuses to get off." Hogging, refuses. Interesting word choices. Jason looked at me. "How long have you been on it?" he asked calmly. "About 20 minutes," I said. "It's my main lift today. I offered to let her work in between sets, but she declined." Jason nodded slowly. He glanced around the gym, still quiet, still plenty of other equipment open. Then he looked back at her. "There's no time limit policy on equipment," he said politely. Her jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous," she said. "He's monopolizing it." Jason kept his voice even. "He's mid-session, and he offered you to rotate in." "I don't want to rotate in," she snapped. "I want to use it." I almost admired the confidence. Almost. Jason gave a small, patient smile. "I understand, but we don't require members to give up equipment after a certain time of day, especially during non-peak hours." She looked at him like he had personally betrayed her. "So you're just letting him do whatever he wants?" "He's following gym rules," Jason replied. There was a beat of silence. I stood there calmly, hands resting lightly on the cable handles. I wasn't smirking, I wasn't reacting, just existing. That seemed to frustrate her more than anything. "This is unbelievable," she said under her breath and walked off. I put my earbud back in and continued my next set, but I could feel it, that tension. You know when you just know something isn't over, when someone walks away too stiffly? Yeah. About 2 minutes later, I saw her again. This time, she wasn't alone. She was walking towards me with one of the staff members. And that's when I realized this random Thursday morning was about to become way more eventful than I ever expected. I saw them coming before they reached me. The staff member was Jason, one of the regular morning guys. Early 30s, calm, always polite. I'd seen him there for years. He knew most of us 6:30 a.m. regulars by face, if not by name. He didn't look angry. He didn't look alarmed. If anything, he looked mildly confused. The woman, on the other hand, looked determined, arms crossed again, chin slightly raised, like she was walking into a courtroom with a case ready to present. I finished my set before acknowledging them. I wasn't going to stop mid-rep just because someone was trying to escalate things. I re-racked the weight, pulled out my earbuds, and turned to face them. "Hey, Jason," I said casually. "Morning," he replied. Then he glanced at the woman. "So, what seems to be the issue?" She jumped in before he even finished the sentence. "He's been hogging this machine for over 20 minutes. I've been waiting and he refuses to get off." Hogging, refuses. Interesting word choices. Jason looked at me. "How long have you been on it?" he asked calmly. "About 20 minutes," I said. "It's my main lift today. I offered to let her work in between sets, but she declined." Jason nodded slowly. He glanced around the gym, still quiet, still plenty of other equipment open. Then he looked back at her. "There's no time limit policy on equipment," he said politely. Her jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous," she said. "He's monopolizing it." Jason kept his voice even. "He's mid-session, and he offered you to rotate in." "I don't want to rotate in," she snapped. "I want to use it." I almost admired the confidence. Almost. Jason gave a small, patient smile. "I understand, but we don't require members to give up equipment after a certain time of day, especially during non-peak hours." She looked at him like he had personally betrayed her. "So you're just letting him do whatever he wants?" "He's following gym rules," Jason replied. There was a beat of silence. I stood there calmly, hands resting lightly on the cable handles. I wasn't smirking, I wasn't reacting, just existing. That seemed to frustrate her more than anything. "This is unbelievable," she said under her breath and walked off. I put my earbud back in and continued my next set, but I could feel it, that tension. You know when you just know something isn't over, when someone walks away too stiffly? Yeah. About 2 minutes later, I saw her again. This time, she wasn't alone. She was walking towards me with one of the staff members. And that's when I realized this random Thursday morning was about to become way more eventful than I ever expected. For a second, I thought she might back down. Most people do when they realize they're not going to get their way. They grumble, roll their eyes, maybe mutter something under their breath, and move on to another machine. But she doubled down. "Fine," she said sharply. "I want to cancel my membership." There was this tiny pause in the air, like even she hadn't expected those words to come out. Carla didn't argue, didn't panic, didn't try to negotiate. "Okay," she said calmly. "We can take care of that at the front desk." That seemed to throw her off slightly. I think she expected pushback, maybe a discount offer, maybe a "please reconsider." Instead, she got agreement. She turned to me one more time. "This is unbelievable," she said. I kept my tone neutral. "I hope you find a gym that works better for you." Not sarcastic, not smug, just factual. That seemed to irritate her even more. She huffed and walked toward the front desk with Carla. Jason stayed behind for a second. He looked at me, then at the machine, then back at me. "You're good," he said quietly. "Just finish up." "Thanks," I replied. He gave me a small nod and walked off. I put my earbuds back in, but I didn't start my next set immediately. I just stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle. The whole thing had lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt longer. I glanced toward the front desk area. She was standing there, arms crossed again, signing something on a tablet. Carla stood beside her, completely composed. No raised voices, no scene, just paperwork. I almost couldn't believe it. All this over waiting a few extra minutes? I finished my next set, controlled and steady. If anything, I felt more focused now. There's something about staying calm when someone expects you to react that feels oddly powerful. As I moved into my next exercise on the same cable machine, one of the regulars walked by, an older guy who's there every single morning without fail. He leaned in slightly and said, "You good?" I said, "Yeah, all good." He shook his head lightly. "People get wild over equipment." I smiled. "Apparently." From the corner of my eye, I saw the woman hand the tablet back to Carla. Carla said something I couldn't hear. The woman grabbed her gym bag, turned sharply, and headed for the exit without looking back. No dramatic final words, no glare in my direction, just gone. The front door closed behind her. And just like that, it was over. Carla and Jason exchanged a quick look at the desk, then went back to their normal routine like nothing unusual had happened. I finished my cable curls, wiped down the handles carefully, and finally stepped away from the machine. It was 7:20 a.m., 45 minutes after I'd started my workout. The cable machine was now completely free, and for the first time that morning, I noticed how quiet everything felt again. The tension had evaporated. I moved on to my last couple of exercises, but the adrenaline lingered a bit. Not in a bad way, just that faint buzz you get after an unexpected confrontation. When I finally headed toward the locker area to grab my bag, Jason caught my eye. He gave me a small nod. Not exaggerated, not theatrical, just a quiet acknowledgement. On my way out, Carla did the same. It wasn't a "you won" nod. It was more like, "you handled that correctly." I scanned my card at the exit, stepped outside into the cool morning air, and checked the time. 7:35 a.m., plenty of time before work. I sat in my car for a moment, replaying the whole thing in my head. I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't been rude, I'd offered to share, And somehow, I'd ended up in the middle of the most dramatic Thursday morning that gym had probably seen in a while. 4 years of uneventful workouts, and the most chaos came from a cable machine at sunrise. I started the car half amused, but I had a feeling this cable machine moment wasn't quite done yet. The next morning, I walked into the gym half expecting whisters. You know how places get after something dramatic happens. People love small talk, especially when it's not about them. But everything felt normal. Music playing, machines humming, the same early morning crowd doing their thing. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined how intense it felt the day before, until I reached the free weights section. "Cable guy," someone called out quietly. I turned. It was the older regular from yesterday, the one who had asked if I was good. He had this small grin on his face. "Morning," I said. "You survived," he replied. "Barely," I said jokingly. He chuckled. "She came in hot." So it wasn't just me, other people had noticed. "I didn't even know what I did," I said. "You existed on the wrong machine," he replied. Fair enough. I started my warm-up and a couple of other regulars gave me subtle nods. Not dramatic, just that look people give when they were there for something awkward and now it's kind of a shared memory. No one made a big deal out of it, but people remembered. About 20 minutes into my workout, Jason walked past. "All good today?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Peaceful." He nodded. "For what it's worth, you handled yesterday well." "I just didn't want to argue," I said. "That's exactly why it worked," he replied. That stuck with me. Not arguing doesn't mean you lose. Sometimes it's the opposite. I moved toward the cable machine again later in my routine. I'll admit I hesitated for a second, not because I was scared, but because I wondered if it would feel weird now. It didn't. It was just a machine. Metal, pulleys, weight stack, no drama attached. I clipped on the rope attachment and started my triceps pushdowns. Halfway through my second set, Carla walked by. "She officially canceled," she said quietly, not stopping. I blinked. "Actually?" "Yep." That surprised me more than I expected. "All because of that?" I asked. Carla shrugged lightly. There were apparently other issues, but that was the final straw. I didn't even know what to say. It felt ridiculous, ending a membership over waiting a few minutes. But then again, maybe it wasn't about the machine at all. Maybe some people walk around already frustrated, just waiting for a moment to unload, and I happened to be standing there. After she walked off, I kept thinking about it, not in a guilty way, more in a curious way. What kind of day was she having before she walked into that gym? What kind of mindset makes a normal inconvenience feel like a personal attack? By the time I finished my workout, the whole thing felt smaller, like it had shrunk overnight. I grabbed my bag and headed toward the exit again. As I passed the front desk, Jason smirked slightly. "Cable machine's yours forever now," he joked. "Don't curse me," I said. We both laughed. When I stepped outside, something unexpected happened. Relief. Not because she left, but because I realized something important. I didn't let someone else's bad mood control mine. I didn't snap back. I didn't match her tone. I stayed steady. And somehow that steadiness shifted the entire outcome. On the drive to work, I thought about how many situations in life are like that. At work, in traffic, in relationships, someone pushes, and your instinct is to push back. But sometimes the strongest move is just not moving. I had no idea that a random Thursday morning at the gym would turn into a small life lesson, and I definitely didn't expect it to stick with me this long. But it did. And deep down, I had this strange feeling that this cable machine moment was going to come back around in a way I didn't expect, because life has a funny way of doing that. A week passed. Then 2. The cable machine went back to being just a cable machine. No tension, no drama, just part of my routine again. But the story didn't disappear. It turned into gym folklore. Nothing huge, just small jokes here and there. If someone hovered too close while another person was using equipment, someone would quietly say, "Careful, we don't need another cancellation." It became one of those inside jokes regulars share. One morning, I came in a little later than usual, around 8 a.m. The early crowd was thinning out, and a different mix of people were working out. I was halfway through my workout when I heard a familiar voice. Not loud, but sharp. My stomach dropped for a second. I turned slightly, and there she was. Same ponytail, same stiff posture, same energy, except this time she was standing at the front desk, talking to Carla. I couldn't hear everything, but her body language said enough. Hands moving quickly, head shaking, shoulders tight. She wasn't working out. She wasn't dressed for it. She was there to talk. I tried to focus on my set, but my curiosity won. After a few minutes, Carla waved Jason over. They both stood calmly while the woman spoke. She didn't look furious like last time. More irritated, frustrated. Finally, Carla pointed toward a clipboard on the desk and explained something. The woman crossed her arms again. Some habits don't change. After a few more minutes, she sighed, visibly, and signed something. Then she left. Again. This time, no dramatic walk, just quick steps out the door. Jason noticed me looking and walked over once she was gone. "She wanted to rejoin," he said. I blinked. "Seriously?" "Yep." "And?" "She didn't like the new sign-up fee." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "So she dramatically canceled and now has to pay more to come back?" "Policies," he said with a shrug. I shook my head. "That's wild." "She said she overreacted," he added. That part surprised me. "She admitted that?" "Not in those exact words," he said, "but close enough." I didn't know why, but that changed something in me. It's easy to turn someone into a villain in your head after a bad moment, but hearing that she might have realized she went too far made the whole thing feel human, flawed, messy, normal. "Is she coming back?" I asked. "Maybe. She said she'll think about it." Jason walked away, leaving me standing there, replaying it all. It would have been easy for me to feel smug, like karma had handled things. But I didn't. Instead, I felt something else. Perspective. We all have moments we wish we could redo, times we let stress speak for us. Maybe that morning wasn't really about the cable machine. Maybe she had something else going on. Work pressure, family stuff. Who knows? I finished my workout and headed toward the exit again. As I passed the front desk, Carla looked at me and smiled slightly. "She might be back next week," she said. I nodded slowly. "If she is, it's fine," I replied. And I meant it. Not because I suddenly liked her, but because I didn't need the tension. If she came back, I'd still use the cable machine, still offer to rotate, still stay calm. Because that wasn't about her. That was about who I decided to be in moments like that. When I stepped outside into the morning sun, I realized something strange. The story wasn't about winning. It wasn't about her canceling. It wasn't even about the gym anymore. It was about control. Not controlling the situation, controlling yourself. And once you figure that part out, everything else feels smaller. Even cable machine drama at 7 a.m. The next Monday, she came back. I knew before I even saw her. There was that slight shift in the air near the entrance, the kind you notice when something familiar but unfinished walks back into the room. I was on the treadmill finishing a light warm-up when the front doors opened, and there she was. Gym bag over her shoulder, dressed to work out this time. No storming, no dramatic energy, just normal. Carla greeted her like she would greet anyone else. No tension, no attitude, just, "Good morning." The woman gave a small nod and scanned her card. So she paid the fee. Interesting. I kept my eyes forward. I wasn't going to stare. This wasn't a movie scene. She walked past the cardio section and toward the strength area. For a second, I wondered if she'd look over at me. She didn't. I finished my warm-up and headed to the weights. And yes, eventually, we both ended up near the cable machines again. Of course we did. There are only 2 of them in the entire gym. I was already using one when she approached the area. This was it. Round 2. Except it wasn't. She stopped a few feet away, waited. Actually waited. I finished my set, stepped back, and instinctively said, "I've got 2 more sets. Want to rotate?" She hesitated just for a second. Then she said, "Yeah, that works." Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It was neutral, almost careful. She stepped in while I rested, adjusted the weight, did her reps, and stepped back. No attitude, no comments, just quiet cooperation. We rotated again, and again. It was smooth, normal, exactly how shared equipment is supposed to work. On the last switch, she looked at me briefly and said, "Thanks." 2 weeks ago, that word probably would have sounded impossible coming from her. I replied, "No problem." And that was it. No apology speech, no big emotional moment, just 2 adults using gym equipment like adults. When she finished and walked off to another machine, I realized something. The tension I expected wasn't there. Not in her, not in me. It was like the whole thing had reset. Later, as I was wiping down the bench near the dumbbells, she walked past again. She paused for a split second. "I overreacted that day," she said quietly. There it was. Simple, direct, no excuses. I shrugged lightly. "It happens." She gave a small nod and walked away. That was the entire apology. No dramatic music, no long explanation, just acknowledgement. And somehow that felt enough. Jason caught my eye from across the room and raised his eyebrows slightly, like he'd witnessed the exchange. I just gave him a small nod back. When I left the gym that morning, something felt lighter. Not because she admitted anything, but because there was no unfinished business anymore. Sometimes conflict drags on because both people keep feeding it. But if even one person decides not to, it runs out of energy fast. And now, it was just over. Completely. The cable machine was just a cable machine again. She became just another regular. And the whole dramatic Thursday morning turned into nothing more than a small chapter in the routine of life. Funny how something that felt huge in the moment can shrink into something almost forgettable. All it took was a little patience and a little pride swallowed on both sides. After that morning, things settled into a new kind of normal. Not awkward, not friendly either, just respectful. We'd show up around the same time a few days a week. Sometimes I'd be at the cable machine first, sometimes she would. Whoever got there second would simply ask, "How many sets?" and the other would answer. That was it. No tension, no edge in her voice. It was strange how different the same person could feel once the heat of a moment was gone. One Friday, the gym was unusually crowded. A promotion had brought in a wave of new members, and every machine seemed taken. I was doing chest presses when I noticed a younger guy pacing near the cable area, clearly frustrated. He kept looking at his phone, then at the machine, then sighing loudly. I recognized that energy, impatience mixed with entitlement. He finally walked up to her, she was using the cable machine at the time, and said something I couldn't hear. But I saw her respond calmly. She held up 2 fingers, probably saying 2 sets. He threw his hands up slightly, and for a split second I thought, here we go again. But she didn't snap. She didn't get defensive. She just continued her set. The guy muttered something and stepped back. And then, this surprised me, she glanced over at me. Not in a dramatic way, just a quick look, like she knew I understood the situation. When she finished her set, she stepped back and said something to the guy. He shook his head and walked away toward the free weights instead. No explosion, no argument, just handled. When she finished completely, she wiped down the machine and walked past me. Guess it wasn't my time to be the dramatic one, she said lightly. It was the first time I'd heard humor in her voice. I smiled. Growth. She let out a small laugh. Yeah, something like that. And that was the first real shift, not from tension to neutral, but from neutral to human. Over the next couple of weeks, we exchanged small comments here and there. Nothing personal, just gym talk. Are you using this bench? Are you done with those plates? Busy today. Short, simple, easy. One morning, I came in later than usual and saw her already there. She was at the cable machine. She noticed me walking toward it and immediately said, I've got one more set. You can take it after. No attitude, no defensiveness, just straightforward communication. Sounds good, I said. As I waited, I realized something. If that first argument had gone differently, if I'd snapped back, raised my voice, matched her tone, we probably would have been locked into some silent rivalry, cold stares, passive-aggressive behavior, gym enemies. Instead, we were just two people who had a bad 5 minutes once. When she finished, she stepped aside and said, All yours. Thanks, I replied. As I adjusted the weight, she hesitated for a second. Honestly, she said, I almost didn't come back after that. I looked at her. Why? Embarrassment, she admitted. I knew I was out of line, and I hate looking stupid. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I respected that she was being real. I don't think anyone thinks about it anymore, I said finally. She nodded slowly. Still. Then she grabbed her water bottle. Anyway, see you around, and she walked off. I stood there for a moment before starting my set. It's funny how pride works. It can make you loud, it can make you defensive, and sometimes it can make you disappear. But if you let it soften just a little, things get easier. By the time I left the gym that day, I realized the story had changed again. It wasn't about conflict anymore. It wasn't even about patience. It was about something simpler. People mess up, and sometimes they come back better. All because someone didn't throw fuel on a small fire. And honestly, that felt better than winning ever would have. By now, the whole thing felt like old history. If someone new joined the gym, they'd never guess there had once been tension around a cable machine at 7 a.m. Life had moved on, but something small had shifted between us. We weren't friends, we didn't exchange personal stories. Still, there was a quiet understanding. One morning, I walked in and immediately noticed the energy was different. Not dramatic, just heavy. She was sitting on a bench near the lockers, staring at her phone. Not scrolling, just staring. Her gym bag was beside her, untouched. I almost walked past. Then I paused. Not because I felt obligated, just because it felt human. You good? I asked, keeping my voice casual. She blinked like she'd just come back to the room. Yeah, she said automatically. Then she sighed. Actually, not really. I sat on the bench across from her, not too close. Bad day? I asked. She let out a small laugh, not amused, just tired. Bad week. She hesitated, like she wasn't sure whether to continue. Then she said, Work stuff. I might get laid off. That explained the weight in her posture, the tightness. The short fuse from weeks ago suddenly made even more sense. That's rough, I said simply. She nodded. I'd been stressed for months. That day with the machine, she shook her head slightly. I think I just snapped. There was no defensiveness in her voice, just honesty. I figured it wasn't really about the machine, I said. She gave me a small, grateful look. Thanks for not making it worse, she said quietly. That hit differently, because she was right. It could have gone worse, easily. We sat in silence for seconds. Not awkward, just shared space. Finally, she stood up and picked up her bag. Guess I should at least try to work out, she said. Probably helps, I replied. It does, she admitted. Clears my head. We ended up rotating on the cable machine again that morning, but this time the dynamic felt completely different. There was no trace of the old energy. Just two people, both carrying their own stuff, using a shared piece of equipment. Halfway through, she said, Funny how small that whole thing feels now. Yeah, I agreed. At the time, it felt huge. She nodded. Isn't that how it always is? It really is. In the moment, everything feels personal, urgent, big. Then life adds something heavier, and suddenly that old argument shrinks into nothing. When we finished, she wiped down the handles and said, "Thanks for earlier." "For what?" "For asking if I was okay." I shrugged. "Just seemed like you weren't." She smiled slightly. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real. As I walked out of the gym that day, I thought about how strange timing can be. 2 months ago, we were almost enemies over a machine. Now, we were just two people trying to handle life without falling apart. Sometimes the difference between conflict and connection is just a little patience, and maybe a little curiosity about what someone else might be carrying. The cable machine didn't change. The gym didn't change. We did. And that made all the difference. After that morning, the gym felt different, at least in my own perception. Not because anything about the equipment had changed. The machines were the same, the layout was the same, even the early morning crowd hadn't shifted much. But the tension that had hung in the air months ago, completely gone. I started noticing small things I hadn't before. The way people waited politely for machines, the subtle nods from regulars when someone yielded their turn without a word. Even the new members seemed calmer, more aware of the rhythm of the gym. It was like someone had flipped a switch, and in some small, unspoken way, I knew I had been part of that change. A few days later, I arrived slightly earlier than usual, 6:15 a.m. The gym was quiet, almost empty. I grabbed my water bottle and towel and headed straight to the cable machines. Sure enough, she was already there, not using a machine, just warming up nearby. She glanced over at me, smiled faintly, and waved. I returned the gesture, appreciating this simplicity of the moment. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. It was a silent acknowledgement of how far things had come. I finished my warm-up and began my sets. When she needed the other cable machine, she came over, gave a brief nod, and started her own routine. We rotated naturally, no hesitation, no drama. Halfway through, she caught my eye again. This time, she spoke softly. "Thanks for keeping it calm back then. I think it really set the tone." I shrugged, trying to keep my response casual. "It's just a machine, nothing to get worked up over." She smiled, this time a little wider. "Yeah, but it's funny how a small moment like that can change the whole atmosphere. I've actually been thinking about it all week." I paused my set, leaning on the handles. People overreact sometimes, but if one person stays calm, it helps everyone else do the same. She nodded slowly, almost thoughtfully. "I see that now. Makes a lot of sense." The rest of the session passed without incident. We rotated on the machines naturally, exchanged short, polite comments, and moved on. Nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational, just two people, silently aware of a past conflict but no longer letting it dictate their behavior. By the time I finished and headed toward the lockers, I reflected on what had happened over the past several months. That small confrontation had been a test of patience, self-control, and perspective. It wasn't about proving who was right or wrong, it was about maintaining composure, respecting personal space, and letting someone else's frustration pass without escalating it. Walking out into the crisp morning air, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because of any victory, but because the tension that had hung over something so trivial had finally dissolved. Sometimes life's small conflicts aren't about winning, they're about learning, adapting, and creating an environment where everyone can coexist peacefully. And in that quiet, early morning gym, that lesson had been learned, both by her and by me. The cable machine, it stayed exactly the same, but the energy around it, completely different. And that, in its own subtle way, made the gym a better place for everyone. It was the final piece of the puzzle, proof that patience, composure, and understanding can turn even the most frustrating situation into something productive, or at least harmless. From that Thursday morning onward, I didn't think twice about sharing equipment. I didn't anticipate conflict. I simply worked out, did my sets, and moved on. And I noticed that everyone else seemed to follow the same rhythm. The gym was calmer. People were more patient. Even new members were learning from the unspoken culture of respect. It was a small victory, quiet and unheralded, but in retrospect, it felt much more significant than any personal triumph ever could. Sometimes the biggest lessons come from the smallest confrontations, and that cable machine in the early hours of the morning had taught me exactly that. Weeks turned into months, and the gym settled back into its normal rhythm, but something subtle had shifted, for everyone. The woman who had once tried to get me kicked out had become just another member. She wasn't a source of tension anymore. She wasn't even someone I consciously thought about. The memory of that dramatic Thursday morning had faded into a story I occasionally remembered with a faint smile. And yet the lessons from it lingered in ways I hadn't expected. Every time I arrived early, I noticed the rhythm of the gym more than ever before. The way people waited politely, rotated efficiently, and respected personal space. It was like the atmosphere itself had been subtly tuned by that one small incident. There was a kind of quiet camaraderie now. I'd catch brief nods from the regulars, a shared smile from someone who remembered the old tension, or a polite "all yours" from someone rotating with me on a machine. I realized then that the conflict hadn't been about me or the cable machine. It had been about the energy people carry into shared spaces, about frustration, patience, and the choices we make in tense moments. One person staying calm could ripple through a room, subtly influencing everyone else. That woman's overreaction had been a test of composure for both of us, but in the end, it had quietly shifted the entire environment. Occasionally, she and I would rotate again, always politely, always without drama. One morning, she even smiled genuinely after a set. That small gesture, which wouldn't have seemed important in any other context, struck me as remarkable. It wasn't about friendship or even reconciliation. It was about mutual recognition that we had both learned something. We had both adapted. I reflected on the irony as I wiped my machine after finishing my workout. A situation that felt explosive, embarrassing, and uncomfortable had become one of the most instructive experiences of my life. It had shown me the power of patience, the value of remaining calm under pressure, and the quiet effectiveness of not feeding someone else's frustration. Walking out into the cool morning air that day, I felt a sense of satisfaction that wasn't about winning or being right. It was deeper. It was about integrity, about handling a situation in a way that allowed the problem to resolve itself without unnecessary conflict. I realized that these small daily victories, like maintaining composure in a shared gym, could ripple into other areas of life: work, relationships, and personal interactions. The gym, with its machines, mirrors, and familiar routines, had become a quiet classroom, and the cable machine, once a flashpoint for tension, had become a symbol of resilience, calm, and subtle influence. The lesson was simple but profound. How we respond to others' behavior often matters far more than what they do. By the time I drove to work, the incident felt like a distant but meaningful memory. A small slice of life that could have escalated into drama, frustration, and resentment had instead become a story of growth, patience, and quiet understanding. And every time I returned to the gym, I carried that lesson with me, that some of the most powerful victories are invisible, uncelebrated, and quietly transformative. Life, I realized, often tests you in small, unexpected ways. Sometimes it's a cable machine at 7 a.m., sometimes it's something bigger, but the principle remains the same. Handle it with patience, stay calm, respect others, and most importantly, control the only thing you truly can: yourself. From that Thursday morning onward, early workouts were peaceful, equipment sharing became easy, and even moments that once would have caused frustration were met with quiet acceptance. The gym was better, the atmosphere was better, and I was better for having endured, observed, and learned. Sometimes the smallest, quietest victories leave the longest lasting impact. And for me, that cable machine confrontation had quietly become one of the most memorable lessons of my life. The gym, the people, the routines, they stayed the same, but I didn't. And that, in the end, was everything.